After making the trek to the National Archives and the LDS Library in 1985, my family history research effort pretty much dried up, and I settled into trying to make my documentation readable and understandable by future generations. Being a computer programmer and interested in databases, I tried my hand at a couple of different methods of keeping the information that I collected. As I was doing this, it was very much a learning process. Back then, the computer that I had was a Commodore Amiga. Wanting to learn about databases, I bought some database software for Amiga. I built a database to hold the genealogy data I had collected so far. This was primarily the basic stuff: the name plus BMD, birth, marriage, and death. I do not recall the schema of the database, but based on what I know now, it was not sufficient for the task. The time spent entering names and dates into that database turned out to be pretty much a waste of time. My next computer was a PC, an IBM clone, as it was called. And the software that I ran on the Amiga could not be run on the PC. After I bought a PC, I wound up having to re-enter all of the data that I had previously entered into the Amiga. As it turns out, that was not the first time that I had to re-enter everything from scratch. On the PC, I wrote what I thought was a rather clever database application for managing a family tree. The program that I wrote had a few bugs, and it never did what I initially thought this type of program should do. Besides the learning experience of writing a database application, this effort was also a waste of time. Around this time, I was a subscriber to the CompuServe dial-up service. I often visited their genealogy forum, and that is where I began to learn about different genealogy software in the GEDCOM file format. I realized that I needed some serious software if I was serious about documenting my family history research. In addition, I learned that whatever software I bought needed to be capable of exporting my data out to a format that was readable by other genealogy software in case I ever wanted or needed to switch to some other software package. That standard format turned out to be the GEDCOM file format. In simple terms, GEDCOM is a standardized method of formatting genealogical data into a text file that can be easily read and converted by any genealogy software program. The GEDCOM specification was initially developed in 1985 and is owned and managed by the Family History Department of The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS. Therefore, after a bit of research into the topic of genealogy software, I bought Family Tree Maker, FTM, and started using it to keep track of all my genealogy data. Around 1994, CompuServe made the internet available to its users, and I built my first web page. Realizing that I could actually publish something on the World Wide Web, the first thing that came to mind was to publish my family history, and so I came up with the idea of calling the web pages Gathering Leaves. In December 1994, the Gathering Leaves pages first appeared on CompuServe's Our World. Around November 1997, I moved these pages to a local ISP, Internet Service Provider, and I remained there until December 2000. I was limited to a tiny amount of space at this site. Because of this, I constantly had to move things around. In March 2001, I contracted with an IPP, Internet Presence Provider, and moved my pages to a more permanent location, complete with a domain name. Later, I will explain why I eventually took down that website in 2019. When I first started using Family Tree Maker, I thought it was a great software package, and in hindsight, that was primarily because I did not know any better. I initially made two huge mistakes, and I partly blame the software I was using for making these mistakes. The first mistake was not recording sources for all the information that I entered. The early versions of FTM did not have a good way of tracking sources. I made the second mistake of giving my data to the Family Tree Maker World Family Tree website. At first, it seemed like a good idea to publish this information on the web, and, in a way, it was a good idea in that I could share my data with other people. The mistake in uploading my data was that a good deal of the information was incorrect, and it eventually made its way onto one of FTM's CDs that they would provide as a companion component to the software. So, at this point, I had bad data without any sources floating around out there on the internet, and I had no control over it. As a result of this, I feel as though I have been ripped off in a way, as genealogy.com was now charging people under the catchphrase "Trust your family history to us" to look at the bad data that I had previously provided to them free of charge. Having had enough of the Family Tree Maker /genealogy.com nonsense, I eventually decided to restrict my publishing to an internet site that I had complete control over, thus solving the problem of not having supplied sources. The intent was that I was committed to correcting the record. Yet taking the next step of ensuring that I recorded all my sources was a little harder to overcome. When I first started publishing my genealogy on the web, I was restricted in two ways: limited space on the web and the actual format in which I presented the information. Initially, I published my data in a form known as a descendancy register. A standard report that lists all the descendants of a particular progenitor in a long, winding format, indented at each generation. Some of these reports can be fairly long and difficult to read. I struggled with data entry and presentation problems for a long time. My main goal was to get something down on paper regarding these research efforts that would be understandable by folks close to me and who were not involved in genealogy school research but were interested in the work. Each time I got deeper and deeper into finding more information, I kept coming up and asking, how am I going to explain all of this? The website was one solution, and my goal all along had been to eventually put the contents of the website on CD-ROM for future preservation. Still, the more I looked at electronic publishing, I could see all sorts of problems. For one thing, I was having trouble seeing the day when the computer would replace the printed page. Most people prefer to read a book rather than stare at a computer screen. They want to hold a piece of paper in their hands, not have to sit in front of a monitor if they have a lot of information to absorb. I thought of writing this book as a compromise, and I must point out that this was in an era before tablets and smartphones. By now, I had switched from Family Tree Maker and used another genealogy software package produced by FamilySearch.org. Personal Ancestral File, PAF, was free and had some features that Family Tree Maker did not have. One such feature was the ability to produce reports in HTML format. At first, I thought I had found exactly what I was looking for. I did prefer the data entry interface in PF over the one offered by FTM, but I found that the HTML output produced by PF was lacking in several regards. I searched the web, and I found a few programs designed to read a GEDCOM file and create work in HTML format. After trying out a couple of them, I decided to write my own GED to HTML program. The result of this was a program that I titled Uncle GED. I used Uncle GED as my publishing tool for nearly 5 years, and I think it served me very well. Since Uncle GED worked well for me, I thought, why not offer it on my website and let others use it? Throughout the decade, 1,000 users had downloaded the application. One of the first people who used my product to produce his website received a mention in a How to Book for people wanting to create their family history website. Around 2003, I switched genealogy software and started using a product called the Master Genealogist, TMG, produced by Holy Genes Incorporated. The learning curve for TMG was quite steep, and it took me about a year before I was entirely comfortable with it. As far as publishing went, I continued to export my data to GEDCOM and used Uncle GED to generate the web pages. That ended when I discovered Second Sight, a companion product for TMG produced by John Cardinal. This product worked with the TMG database and produced HTML output in various styles and formats. In November 2019, I decided to take the web pages down. It had been almost a decade since I had last updated the website. Plus, the software I used to generate hundreds of web pages became obsolete. In addition to that, in 10 years' time, I received only 2 inquiries. Again, I am getting a little ahead of the story, as I have left out all the stuff that happened in between. That is all we have time for now. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit the like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the Gathering More Leaves channel.